Well, y'all want to know why I enjoy football more than basketball after looking at some of the things Matt's come up with here between us and Duke in the last 15 years, which I said, 10 to 15 years is how you got to evaluate in this day and age where your program is. And there's some pretty impressive things here, and I just wish I had 40 days to enjoy it like you do in a bowl game instead of 4 or 5. But there's no question that if you look at the NCAA tournament and what's been done, nobody's Duke because Duke is Duke, but we're one of the closest things to it as far as consistency, and that should make for an incredible game. We've now played, I guess, 13 out of 17 of our last 17 games against NCAA teams, so I said that would prepare us. It has. Still having 5 teams left, I think is good, but maybe the most important thing for me was this weekend and what we did. Defensively, holding teams to 32% was maybe as good as we've had in a 2-game series for a long, long time. The plus 23 rebound edge is, again, something that this program has done things like that in the past, but this year's team hasn't. Even defensively, this year's team hasn't been maybe quite as good. So I thought those 2 things were awfully good against teams that, like a Memphis, who had scored all year long against everybody they've played. I'm hoping Indy brings us the same memories that the Palace did. We've been pretty successful in the NCAA tournament down in Indy, and yet, unfortunately, what you did in the past doesn't do anything except make you feel a little more comfortable. It doesn't win any games or do anything for you. And looking at Duke, let's face it, they're number 1 seed without Kelly. If 1 or 2 things didn't happen at the end, but definitely with him, I think this is a team that's 19-1 and been a 1 seed all along with him. Not that it really matters at this point in time of the tournament, but what does matter is they're shooting over 40% from the 3 as a team, and they've got 5 guys that shoot over 40%, or 38%. That's impressive, and I just think they're extremely well coached. They do not turn the ball over much. They do not make many mistakes. They do not have maybe the great depth, although last night I was impressed with the 2 subs, Jefferson and Hairston, that came in and, did a great job for them, but their depth is not maybe a strength of their team in general. And yet size, they've got a stretch 4. They've got 3 really good guards. And yet I think we do match up with them. Whether we match up and can play with them, we're going to find out. But I think we at least match up with them fairly well. So, the appreciation I've had for that program my whole career. Started early when we played them, I think, in the game in Chicago, and that led to that game in Tampa. And it hasn't changed since. So I know what kind of program they have. I know how they do things. I appreciate them. I look up to them and in that respect. And yet it's time now to play them, and I feel a little differently about that. So I'm looking forward to the challenge. Questions?
Tom, you and I talked after the game about communication. After watching the film of that game, was that the kind of communication you've been looking for and hungry for as far as your players with each other?
I do think that is a true statement. There was definitely even more communication from our bench to our players out there on certain plays they ran and things like that. And, it's getting better. I mean, the 2 guys that struggle the most are, Keith at times and Gary at times, and they're your guards. And that's going to be something we're going to harp on all week because when you play a team like this, you don't guard their ball screens with 2 people. You guard them with 4 or 5, and everybody's got to be on the understand what's going on. And for somebody in the back row to remind guys in the front row what they should be doing is, I think, imperative. So I'm really encouraged by the fact that for a weekend we made some progress in that area. Now can we sustain and even build on it? That's what I'm looking for this week.
Tom, you talk about Duke and kind of the brand aura, and that Louisville has that too in this region. Is there, and being surprised by the numbers being similar, do you recognize, though, that to many people that aura exists with this program now?
I was telling Matt coming down here, I said, geez, and then he was the one that brought up football. No, I look at the Sweet 16s with Kansas. I look at the, what has been like in the last 16 seasons since our first one, and only Duke has more Sweet 16 appearances, as we know, with 13, and we have 11. But that puts us in rare air, and I guess the hardest thing I have to do is maybe look at that and feel good about it. I said the day will come when I'll be able to feel great about it. But sometimes I look at it and I say, boy, I don't even appreciate it myself, so why should I expect someone else to appreciate it? And I got to find that happy medium in there somewhere. And maybe it'll be Friday night after, because I think it's important now that you get into this tournament, and as the upsets happen and everything, it still usually gets down to the marquee teams. And I think this will be one of the best matchups there'll be, and that's what you want to play for. That's what you want to be in, and I think we've earned that over our 15, 16 years of real great success, and so I'm anxious to see how that fares for us.
Tom, the Big Ten has never done this well to this point. It's a record. It's a one-off of a record for any conference. My question is, does this validate to you what you thought all year, that this was the best conference, top to bottom?
Larry, it really doesn't validate it, because I'm not huge on thinking that, matchups can play a difference in these games, and to some it won't be validated unless the Big Ten wins a championship. So does it help? Yeah, it helps, but I thought there's many years when we played the ACC Big Ten Challenge that our conference was as good as better, but we didn't have Indiana or Ohio State playing in it. Just nobody cared, nobody wrote about it, nobody understood it. Those were two of our best teams at the time. So perception becomes a little bit of reality, and the more games you win and the more games, the farther you go, the perception is of that. I think we've earned our keep again over the 18 grueling games in that Big Ten tournament. And, now this is frosting on the cake. Does it help? I'm sure it helps in perception. Does it help any in my mind? No. I already thought it was. I already believe it was. And there were years I thought the Big East was, and there were years I thought the ACC was. So definitely not fighting for our spot. I just think it's been earned.
I'm just wondering how Keith's doing, the shoulder, the knee.
Yeah. I am a little. I think that the shoulder is going to be fine. The knee I think is going to be fine, but you could tell he wasn't the same when you go back and watch film. Wasn't as aggressive defensively. He said yesterday he was a little sore, but definitely felt, where he could have played that day. I could have put him back in that game as far as the shoulder goes. He just wasn't as, I told him later, I said, you got to make me feel comfortable. Don't worry about the doctors and trainers and all that. They can do their medical stuff. I got to have body language, eyesight, When Cleves came out of that game back a few years ago, he threatened me to put him back in. That's the only reason I did. I didn't want to be embarrassed in front of all those people, where I asked Keith, can you go back in? Yeah. And I just didn't feel the same. Now, maybe some of that's Keith's personality, because he's as tough as Cleves or anybody else I've had. So I think he's going to be fine. I think he'll be a little sore, and maybe we'll keep him out of some drills this week that are more physical. But I'm anxious to see today whether it bothers him shooting, because it is his right arm. That's the only thing that's left. But he shot free throws in that yesterday on their own and didn't seem to have any problems.
Tom, I don't think you would necessarily call Gary a very demonstrative guy out there, but after he hit a couple of the shots the other day, he probably was more than at any point this year. Do you see that kind of helping, especially going back to Indy? He's going to be close to home. Is this kind of like all coming together for him at the right time, I guess?
Well, I think it is. I think that's why I always say you got to be a little demonstrative. You got to show your emotion. The flat line thing that some people want to talk about, that's cool. What's cool about it? Why should you have to guess if a guy's feeling good or feeling bad? You know, I don't think that's cool, and that's what I tell him, you know. And, you know, he did it in the Big Ten tournament a couple times, and I just think a guy's got to, if he's really passionate, you know, as goofy as the Knicks thing, you know, gets, or scenes like that, if you're passionate about things, I always told you stories that I used to watch Lute Olson, and, you know, when you're winning 30 games and you're losing 2, you can sit there and look like $1 million, but when you have one in a couple of those years that he had at the end, and that great hair is messed and the coat is up in the stands, and, you know, I say, hey, God, he's just like the rest of us. He just didn't lose enough games to get there. And I believe that passion is a motivator. It drives you. And some people can hold it in. They say, I'm not a big believer in that. So I say if it's important to you, you're going to see that it's important. And Gary's learning how to do that. Going back home is going to be great. I know his family's excited. You know, there'll be some pressures with that, just like our guys playing in Detroit, but it beats the heck out of the alternative, I can promise that.
Tom, how much has Adrien grown in the past 12 months, just in his game and his maturity?
As much as his 6'10" size, you know, I mean, he has grown a lot. I think he's, you know, when I say maturity, I think right away you get to, you know, like he was an immature little kid. It's not that. It's the maturity of understanding different things you have to do to be successful at this level. And so it's not like he's some immature baby. It's that he was immature to understand what you have to do and how hard you have to work, and that things don't just come easy. And that's a process for some kids, especially kids that have had it the other way. And I think Adrien Payne has grown as much as any player I've had since Peterson. I always use him because I thought he grew athletically, academically, and socially. And AP, when you look at that story that was on CBS the other day, and, you know, we lived it here. I mean, he's just an incredible kid, and accountability and all that, he's been great, but it was figuring out that you got to listen to people that are trying to give you good advice, and, you know, trying to weigh who's giving you good advice and who's bad advice when you maybe never had anybody in your life that did that for you, is difficult. And it's difficult for most of us that have had people in our lives to do that. You lose your mother at 6, and that puts a whole different, you know, deal in this thing. And so I think, and basketball-wise, you know, he's in there today watching more film than anybody. I mean, he just does things that most big guys don't do. Not many I've had have done that anyway. And so I think he's grown in all areas, and really proud of him, really pleased, really happy for him. And yet he's got a heck of a chore ahead of him, because the Kelly kid is a very, very good player.
Along those same lines with Adrien, how would you rate his performance among some of the big guys that you've had in that game on Saturday? Because it seemed like he was in a lot of different places doing a lot of different things.
Well, probably that's the one thing that we've asked him to do a little bit more. I mean, we asked Draymond to do a lot, but I don't know if you consider him a big man. Paul Davis used to have to do some things. Andre Hudson, you know, I look back at the guys that did, but when you add blocking shots in there, when you look at him, you know, sometimes we were able to switch with him with smaller guards because of his athletic ability. We could do that with Hudson a little bit, but wasn't as big. But, you know, I'd say his performances are getting better and better every game, and the best of this, the best of that. I don't know. I don't have time to look back and think back, but it's impressed me. And what's impressed me even more is the fact that he's learning how to become a sponge, and that was very, very difficult for him. I mean, we brought his high school coach up. We brought his assistant high school coach up, and different people to try to figure out how to get through to him, because he didn't disrespectfully do it. He just wasn't great at taking things from anybody. And I think he's so much more mature and so much better at that now, and I think it's one of the reasons his game has flourished. I really do.
When you look at the performances last weekend with Dawson and Appling, both seem to play well without scoring a ton. The Are they understanding their worth isn't necessarily in points? Is that a growth of those guys? And you just talk about where they're at in terms of.
Well, I think Dawson has made some big strides too, and you're right. It's not always in scoring, but we looked at yesterday. We were watching a film together as a team, and I said, Dawson's got about 3 or 4 hockey assists. He knocked balls loose that somebody else got and put in. He was on the offensive boards a lot. He didn't get called for a rebound on some of them. He didn't get an assist on some of them, but he made plays. A couple times he just went in there. One guy boxed him out. I mean, on one of Adrien's dunks, that happened. On another one of Adrien's big plays, Nix came flying in, and 2 guys, knocked him down, and that left AP there. So active is really what we need Brandon Dawson to be, and Adrien Payne. And I think I said this after the game, but I definitely said in kind of responding to the emotional part of Gary Harris, their athletes look like great athletes because they play with that on their face. We have some very good athletes too. I mean, Harris, Payne, and Dawson at their positions are as good athletes as most of the country has, but I always don't play that way. And so that's what I preached before that last game against Memphis, and I think each had some success in doing that, and hopefully now there'll be some carryover value down the road.
Athletic as well, I mean, that play where he has Harris goes down with his fourth, and then he goes right down and scores. Maybe there's only about the understanding that the fourth.
Yeah, Keith has been, believe it or not, a pretty unselfish kid since he got here. He's not the typical guy that comes in that's a point guard that has to score, that is just hunting shots. And I think he has a better understanding that running the team is important, and yet we still need him to score. So how do you find that happy medium? They got a kid in Cook who's doing that also. And I think Keith did a very good job of that over the weekend, and he too has made some big progress. So those are 2 of our best athletes, in Keith and Brandon, who I think their value defensively. I mean, Dawson's going to have to be really good on some guards this weekend because their perimeter guys are very, very good, and they got a little depth there. Not as much depth inside maybe, but I'm looking forward to seeing how he responds to that, both guys.
Tom, 2 things. I guess first, do you see Gary and Keith taking turns on Curry defensively, or will it be one of them more exclusively? And then secondly, when you look back at this weekend, you led for extended periods by as much as 15 to 20 points, and yet there was still some sloppiness in there. Does that give you any sort of encouragement that you're handling teams pretty thoroughly despite not playing close to your best?
No, it actually discourages me, Instead of encourages me, it discourages me because it means there's a lack of discipline and a lack of really understanding that, you get a team down. I mean, we have the intentional foul. They make the 2 free throws, and they hit a 3 coming out, a 12, 13-point lead. It's down to 7. That happens in that tournament. Just ask half the teams that are sitting at home. So there's nothing encouraging about that. I mean, getting a 20-point lead, that part is encouraging. After that, very disappointed in how we took care of the ball. And, we got Payne coming out and throwing, fly patterns to Nix. I bet you D'Antonio and Swartz crawled up in their seats when they saw that. I mean, let's just get a down tackle and put him as the wide receiver and let's go with it. That's kind of what we were doing. And so that's undisciplined. That's got to change. And was something I really harped on yesterday. I thought, if there's one big difference between our 2 teams, that is one big difference. Now, we've been playing too. When all of a sudden Harris is out and Appling's out, we had some strange guard combinations in there that were handling the ball a lot, and I think that had something to do with it. But if there's something that I still feel at the end of the season, I thought we got better than we were at the beginning of the season in the turnovers and taking care of it. And then I think we've gotten a little sloppy in this weekend. That shows immaturity if we can get a lead and start dinking around with the ball instead of taking care of it. So still got some work to do in that area.
And defending Curry,
I think, to be very honest with you, the way they used ball screens and things, I think we're going to have 5 guys defending every guy that is involved in those kind of plays. So, Curry, who do we start out with him on? That hasn't been determined yet, to be very blunt and honest about it. And if it was, I guess I'm not sure I'd give it away, but it's not any big deal. Everybody knows we switch a lot. Everybody knows we do things like that. It'd be different guys on different players. But I think, back to that first part of it and the discipline, even in the foul trouble we got, we got to be a little bit more mature on, okay, if you got 2, what are you going to do on your 3rd? What are you going to do on your 4th? Things like that. So that'll determine some of it too, as we see who we think's the best driver. And Suleiman actually does some good things off ball screens too. And when you got a pick and pop guy, if you watch the Miami game, what we're going to do if we watch the Miami game is we're going to put 5 players on Kelly and let the others try to beat us. That's how good he was in that game. But they do some different things, and we'll just have to be covering them different ways. But we're going to have everybody involved. I think if I looked at some other things we did in that last game, the Memphis game, we did a better job of really kind of 1 or 2 guys on the offside helping those guys on the ball screens. I didn't think we did as good a job in the Valpo game, so that's what we're looking at too.
Tom, was that the best rebounding performance as it appeared to us the other day? And if so, have you figured out why? And is it something that could be more of a weapon for you in this game than maybe you anticipated going in the tournament?
Yeah, definitely. It was surprising to me. So when you say, as it appeared to you, and I'm looking at the same thing, why did it appear that way? Well, number one, Dawson was in there 10 times more. He didn't necessarily get 10 times the rebounds. He was just way more active. That was one thing. And I think, Payne and Nix are getting better in that area. But Dawson creates some things just by going that gives those other guys who are athletic too, and athletic with some length. So not to put a lot of pressure on Brandon, but probably what I'm going to do all week is put a lot of pressure on Brandon, because maybe it's time now where I still say the opening play of that game, if you remember, Nix went baseline, gave a great pass to Dawson, and he went up. And I asked him why he didn't dunk it with his elbows, and instead he tried to lay it up, and he got it blocked. And that still tells me that somewhere in there, he's just not at the level he was at. And so, but it also tells me when he said, I'm healthy, I'm good. So this week we're going to challenge him. And if there's one guy I'm going to challenge as much as anybody, it's going to be Brandon Dawson, because I think he has the most room to grow. And I don't think anybody's seen the kid that I recruited yet. We started to at the end of last year, understand the reasons why this year, but maybe it's time to take the gloves off, so it'll be a fun week.
Coach, among many attributes, your teams are always known for defense and rebounding. When you look at Duke, what are the staples you see out of Coach K's team? And also, can you talk about how your relationship with him has grown over the many high-profile meetings you've had during your careers?
Well, the first part of it, they don't beat themselves very often. I mean, you hope most good programs don't, but I think that has been a staple. They're well prepared, they're well coached, they don't beat themselves. They usually have players that are very talented, that are multi-dimensional, guys that can dribble, pass, and shoot. I think he took a Seth Curry, who I don't think was that way when he came, and I've watched every year he's grown as a ball handler, as a better passer. Cook, I think, has made great progress in that area too. They're usually a team that's very stingy defensively, and yet they always haven't been a great rebounding team. And this year, I wouldn't say they're great, but I'd say they're pretty solid if you get their horseback in there. I mean, remember, they played 13 games without one of their best defenders and one of their best better rebounders. So when you look at their stats, even defensively, they're not quite Dukish, But ours haven't been quite Michigan State-ish either. If you looked at stats, both in rebounding and in defensive field goal percentage. But if you look at what's going to win for them, what won for them the other night, they checked their tail off, I thought, against Creighton. I thought that was a very good defensive game, and they're rebounding better now in the tournament because I think he's back. And I just think that they have it. They believe in themselves in the tournament. It's part of the process there. He's built that over 33, 4, 5 years, however long he's been there. And I guess what I've always respected about him is I respect anybody that can do it over a period of time. To do it at the same school over that length of time, there's only a few people in the country that I've ever known that have done that. And so that's where the respect comes in. And plus, we've had some good games. You know, he's a guy you can talk to. He's been very good for basketball in general, not only with the Olympics, but all the time he was on the board, and he still gives great input. So, yeah, I do have great respect for him, and yet I think he appreciates that we're going to compete, and they're going to compete, and it should be a war.
Hey, Tom. Going back to Adrien, in the comparison you were making with him and Mo Pete, Pete had Cleaves, who was constantly getting in his face,
Right.
threatening his life and throwing him in the lockers at the Palace if he wasn't shooting enough. Who or what was it that kind of confronted Adrien to get him to
You know what?
clean that sponge?
That is a question that makes what he's done even so much better. You got to give a little credit to Dede. Dede lived with him last year, taught him how to watch film, taught him how to do some things. You know, I think you'd see him emerge right off the charts if, you know, we don't have that. We all know that. We've all talked about it. So, you know, if you look at what this kid has done, he's had people that have come into his life. You know, everybody's saw the stories, his high school coach and assistant, his superintendent of schools, Dr. Gates, who was unbelievable. But I think we've done a good job with him. I think I have. I think my assistants have. We spend an enormous amount of time with him because he's not a guy that's just going to, hey, Adrien, do it this way. He is like my kid. Why? There's always got to be a why. And when the whys are in the huddles, it's you only got 30 seconds. You know, I can't give it to you why now. I'll give it to you tonight. You know, don't talk about it now, please. You know, but so it took me a while to understand him a while to understand me. But I think that's what makes it so remarkable what he's done. You know, he hasn't had the normal people in his life, and then his grandmother, who he was, you know, so close to, and it was easier for us, you know, because we'd call grandma and she would, you know, give us some input. But all those things have made it harder road for him. And yet, if you look what kind of kid he is, socially, what kind of kid he is, academically, and now when you look at his growth as a player, you know, another 10, 15 pounds on him and things like that, I think this kid's got a chance to be something really, really special here, and he'll have earned it. He'll have done it the hard way. You know, he'll have worked his way through it. And you are so right. I never thought about that. You know, Mateen, he beat Pete like, you know, like I couldn't even come close to doing what he did. He pushed him. He had him in the gym. He challenged him in the weight room. You know, it was, and Pete's parents were really good at that. You know, Adrien hasn't had that. And I guess you're making me think right on my feet here. That makes it more impressive to me on what he's done, and yet even more exciting on what I think he can do in the future. Good.
Looking at your approach over the years, sometimes in this week you take it easy, watch a lot more film, a lot more walkthroughs. Sometimes you're pushing your guys. What's your philosophy this week, Tom?
Well, I'm gaining that. You know, at 12 o'clock last night, I started figuring out what are we going to do this week. You get a little extra time too. You know, we had the day off yesterday, really, and we're going to go, you know, decently hard. I mean, I think that's who we are. I think that's who Duke is. You know, we're going to get after it today and tomorrow, and then kind of, you know, dial it down a little bit as we go. But I think this team. We have to look at the things and work hard enough to understand we got to rebound well because that's one of our advantages. we got to take care of the ball, and the only way we're going to be able to do that is to go as hard as we can in practice and really harp on that part of it. And then we're also going to try to spend extra time on one other area that's dropped for us has been our free throw shooting. We went from a 70 down to a 63 in these 2 games, and Nick's went from an 80 to a 43. Now, not as many reps, but in watching him on tape, he's been flat-footed, which means he's a little tired and things like that. So we're going to try to really spend some time on that, because that's something you can do that isn't as physically demanding. So we'll probably have some night sessions where we're watching a little tape and shooting a ton of free throws, including yesterday. This is where those things make a difference. You know, the 1 or 2 free throws makes a difference in games like this, I hope. I mean, I think it's going to be that kind of game.
Tom, right here in the back. You talked a little bit about Duke's three-point shooting. What can you do to try and limit that as best you can, knowing that in these types of games that can be a big difference?
We're going to tackle them. You know, we're going to try to be right on them. I mean, we got to defend them at the 3, and yet also understand they've got ability to penetrate. All 3 of those guys can penetrate. They have ability to penetrate and kick out, and they've got a 6'11", very athletic kid in Plumlee who, if they do penetrate, you know, and they throw it up there, even if they don't make it, he's gobbling it up. That's where he can be very effective. So how we cover ball screens and that is going to be a very big part of this game, and it might be a couple different ways we do it. You know, they got the pick and pop with Kelly, and we haven't had, I mean, Thomas, I guess a little bit like that for Ohio State, where you can't give them an open shot. But they had other people we could sag off of and help, you know. There's not a lot of people you can leave in this game, you know. Mike doesn't shoot it as well, so we won't guard him. But other than that, just about any one of those guards or Kelly you put on the floor is very capable of scoring big points and shooting a high percentage. So that's why I said it's going to take 5 guys moving together. We're not going to have a lot of margin for error, and that's the way it should be when you get to the Sweet 16.
Tom, Pastner said that Payne is the X factor on your team, and if he plays like he did, that you guys go to the Final Four. Would you put that on his shoulders, that he's kind of the X factor? If he plays close to his potential, that he could be that kind of difference maker?
Well, the one thing I like about that statement, you know, it wasn't like he had 30 points. And he had 14 points, you know, but he had a few blocks. He played pretty good defense. He had 10 rebounds. Do I think he's capable of that on a night-in, night-out basis? I do. Where he's a little bit of an X factor. He's also, he's not shooting it like a Kelly, but he's got the ability to shoot the ball, so he's got to be guarded that way. And him and Nix have been playing so much better together, as you guys stated after the game, and I agree with. You know, what we looked at the beginning of the year and we have now is night and day, but that's usually what happens when you put guys in different positions. It takes some time to grow. And so I don't know if it's, I can think of so many players that I think at this time, I still think we're going to get something out of him. It's Dawson that I think can give more. You know, I don't know how much more Payne can give. He's got to be consistent at that level. But I'm not sure I'd throw all that on his back, even though right now I'm going to throw a lot on a lot of people's back tonight.
Tom, I know this has happened in the past, but it seems like lately you and Duke have been going head-to-head on the recruiting trail. Is that any sort of statement on any change on your part, or maybe where your program has gone? Or
well, you know, I think a little bit. You know, it seems like Duke and Kentucky have been in more of our battles, and we're not winning enough of them. But I don't know if that's any change. I think it's just the way it's happened. But as I said, you know, they've got a lot of reasons to be able to sell a lot there, and you know, and we're continuously building on our reasons and making. When you look at the, you know, I told you guys a long time ago that come back in 10 years, and now I can say come back in, you know, pretty soon 20 years. And that's when it really starts, I think, to matter, when you get into that 15 and 20 years. And we have been pretty consistent. They've been incredibly consistent. And in the meantime, they've won a couple national championships in that time period. And so, you know, the chase is still on, and whether it be in recruiting or whether it be in games. But I think the good part about it is there's a respect factor there in the way they do it and the way we've done it. And so I don't think one beating the other. It's not like an interstate football game that it's going to sway 10 recruits one way or the other. But I do think that when you play in these games, it helps everybody, you know, the university, the program, and recruiting.
Tom, we just got this information, so you probably don't know, but Tubby Smith has been fired at Minnesota. Your reaction to that, and what does it say about the state of the game, the conference, the profession?
Well, I was Tubby's a good friend of mine, so that does hit me a little bit harder. You know, Ben Howell, and I was a little upset last night because I think, in all fairness, when I get on the social media, you know, I can't have a press conference without doing it, but when I get on, you know, reporters, I was very upset with, you know, like Bill Walton. I just thought that was a personal attack on somebody. If you guys, you know, give opinion attacks, that's one thing. When they get personal, that's another in my mind. But this one hits home a lot harder to me. I mean, my family and wives are close. I love Donna. She's great. And you know what I always appreciated about Tubby? He was in that most high-profile program of all in Kentucky, and he did it with class. He did it with integrity. He did it with, you know, just an incredible amount of respect if you talk to people. And, you know, not knowing all the circumstances, and I'm sure I'll call him when I get out of here, but not knowing all the circumstances, it is amazing how, you know, some injuries, some problems. I know a couple years ago he had some issues like I had. And you lose kids, and sometimes they think it's the coach, and that's fine. But sometimes there's factors that can't be revealed. And I know he went through some of that. And so I'm saddened. I mean, he's one of the best guys. I've been on the board with him. I've been in the Big Ten. I was so excited when he came aboard because I knew we had a class guy who was going to do it the right way. And, you know, I don't say this about many people, but I love the Tubby Smiths of the world, and there's not many of them, because he just was always so great. And we actually had a lot of success against, you know, both Minnesota and some against Kentucky. And he never changed one iota as far as our relationship. And so, you know, I guess I'll close it at that. And maybe you can ask me something later because I want to get on to what we're doing. But that bothers me a lot. I understand the profession I'm in. I understand what George Perlis told me when I got the job, that you will be fired. I tell you guys that all the time, and everybody disagrees with one thing or the other. But we just saw a guy that won his conference championships, been to 3 Final Fours, and not knowing all the circumstances is unfair to an AD or anyone else. I felt I knew the ones with Bruce Weber a little bit better, but I don't know all those circumstances. I know some of the things that have happened up there with the injuries and the issues, but he's a hell of a coach and a hell of a guy, and I will. It'll be a loss for this league, and a loss for college basketball if he doesn't stay in it, because he's got integrity beyond belief, and let me tell you, he's been in some tough situations. So I'll close it up with bothers me, saddens me. Don't know all the circumstances, so I can't comment much more than that. But this will be something that'll hit home for a while.